Thank you very much, Senator Gale. Colleagues, this morning, I have apologies for absence for Senator Morris and Senator Sinclair. And I do have online with me my colleague, Senator Dr. Sophia Longmore, Senator Sophia Fraser-Binns, and Senator Gabriela Morris. As always, Senator Gale, as I said before, is with me in the chamber. So, colleagues, where we are today, and it's not my intention to have very lengthy remarks this morning. On the last occasion, we heard from the Mona Aging and Wellness group, in addition to a few other individuals who made submissions and oral presentations. And colleagues will recall that we had quite lengthy and substantive questions for the Mona Aging Group and Professor Denise Eldemeier-Shero. They agreed very graciously to come back to respond to some of those questions and concerns, and also to give us a second bite at the cherry in terms of our own interrogation of some of the proposals that they have made. So we want to thank them very much. We were also scheduled to hear from Mrs. Patricia Duncan Sutherland, who is representing I believe she's representing the PNP Women's Movement. Am I correct in saying that? In her presentation, that's the role in which she's present before us today. And she had provided us with a summary of the issues she would raise with us. Unfortunately, we did not get her presentation until some minutes before this meeting. I have asked the clerk to share that presentation with the members, and if the members are minded, then we would allow her to go at presentation this morning, and if so, then I would propose that we go ahead with her and just give her some notice so she can get her presentation loaded. There is a reason why we ask for these things to be delivered to the Parliament ahead of time, and a big part of it, members and the public would know that we do have limitations in a Parliament that just is not necessarily fit for purpose anymore. And so we need a little bit of leeway, lead time to be able to get our IT sorted. Mr. Brown has done a great job of preparing us this morning. I don't anticipate we will have any difficulties, and I do apologize to him for the late submission of this presentation for his assistance. So if there are no objections, then we will go ahead. The other matter, colleagues, that I want to just touch on is the question of our minutes that are piling up on us. I myself have had occasion just to go through the first couple minutes. I'm still outstanding on the last couple ones that we have had. And so we did have a meeting scheduled. I apologize to members for having to cancel and to reschedule it. I did have an emergency that day. I am hoping that if there is room for us to meet online on Friday, that we'll be able to do that. If not, if there is no room for that, then we will seek a date for the following week to just quickly convene, and I would ask members to just make sure that they're reviewing the minutes so we can go through quickly. There should be room. It's sounding like there might be. So with that said, we are all members of the Senate, so that time should already have been set aside. So I will confer with the committee clerk, and we'll figure out a time to be able to do that online. That said, my ask then is that we defer these until that meeting. And so without further ado, if there are no other, I'm so sorry, I beg your pardon. I do want to welcome and to acknowledge two interns with the Legislative Council Department who are with us from Norman Manley Law School, just completing their first year, and that is Miss Marion Johnson and Miss Kadian McKenzie. Just give a little wave so that the committee members can see you and acknowledge you. And they are interning with the Legislative Council Department. Ms. Stewart, who is our Senior Legislative Counsel, could you just give us, just say a few brief words about the work the interns do when they come here? It's such an important thing for young lawyers to be able to get real practical experience, on-the-job experience while they're training. So just a few seconds of what you're going to do with them while they're here. Try the other mic. Use the other mic. Nothing? We have no mics in the second row. Okay. Do you have mic? Not. You do, on that side. Crave your indulgence, colleagues. It seems the mic's on the left side of me. To my left. Yes?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Not sounding so wonderful. Okay, try again.
So, can you hear me? All right, thank you very much. All right, thank you, Chair, for the introduction of our new legal interns. Now, Ms. Marian Johnson and Ms. Kadian McKenzie has expressed in their application letters and also during our interaction that they have a keen interest in legislative drafting, policy development and analysis, as well as parliamentary practice, procedures, and protocol. Now, the Parliament plays a very integral role in the enactment of legislation, particularly the parliamentary committees that delves into the intricacies of policy development. So, as a result, we welcome them because their internship will provide the opportunity to apply their academic knowledge, skills in a real-world work environment and garner valuable practical experience. So some of the work that they'll be undertaking with the department, they will conduct research on a range of legal, legislative, and constitutional matters, engage in research, assist with the drafting of legislative instruments where necessary. They will review the reports of the various parliamentary committees, assist with the review of the standing orders of the Houses of Parliament, engage in meetings with the Office of the Parliamentary Council, the Attorney General Chambers, Legal Reform Division. They will assist with the preparations of presentations for parliamentary seminars and workshops, all with the ultimate aim of developing policy and legislation and enhancing the work of the Parliament.
Very well. Thank you very much for that. And we wish the two ladies well in their time with you. It is in-service training, yes? And I'm sure that you will be well guided and well protected in a safe place to learn by Miss Stewart and Ms. Jimenez in the Legislative Council Department. So good luck to you. The committee will be rooting for you. I also want to acknowledge members, just in case my members don't remember that we have a research team at the Parliament. Our Senior Research Officer, Ms. Stephanie Hamilton, and Ms. Angelica Patterson, have I said that right? Who is our research officer. And these ladies assist the committees with the preparation of our matrices. They assist with other research projects for various committees and when the members are on the floor in both houses. So I want to just acknowledge them, remind you that they're here supporting the work of the Parliament and therefore here in national service. I want to thank them and just remind the committee that we have some support to carry out the work that we're doing. Thank you very much. Without further ado, and with no objections from my members, my online colleagues, please remember that we are monitoring the online platform, so just use the raise hand feature, and we'll just acknowledge you in the order and indicate that to you so that you can know when you're up next. Without further ado, can we invite Mrs. Patricia Duncan Sutherland to attend and to deliver her presentation? In fact, Madam Audley, can you just have everybody come in at the same time? Yes, thank you. I understand that the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, who we had invited to monitor these proceedings, are here. I apologize. They should have been in long ago. Members, while we're waiting on the presentation to load, I just want to remind my colleagues online, as I'm being asked to do, that whenever you're making an intervention, if you could just turn your camera on at that time. Thank you. Can I get IT in the chamber, please? We need the IT department down in the chamber as quickly as possible. Thank you so much. Colleagues, if there are no objections, can I just suspend the meeting for 5 minutes? Thank you. Thank you, colleagues, for your indulgence. And thank you to the IT department, Mr. Brown, for his assistance and support. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mrs. Patricia Duncan Sutherland, representing the PNP Women's Movement, who, colleagues, as I indicated, had sent a summary of her submission and has now sent a PowerPoint presentation that you can use to follow along. So, Mrs. Duncan Sutherland, can you just introduce yourself and a little bit about what brings you here with the interest you have to this committee?
Thank you very much, Senator Golding Campbell, and good morning, senators and members who are here, all of the experts in the space. And thank you, Ms. Beckford, for facilitating this. I'm here, I'm Patricia Duncan Sutherland, and I'm here as the opposition spokesperson on social transformation and protection. I also am the president of the PNP Women's Movement, and elderly women have a particularly difficult environment that they live in Jamaica. And so I am very, very happy that Senator Floyd Morris was able to put this private motion to the Senate, and that we can have this conversation today around how to strengthen legislation so we can have a really transformed environment for the elderly in our country. Yeah? The truth is that in our environment in Jamaica, we have some belief systems that don't necessarily serve us well. And
Mrs. Duncan Sutherland, just pull the mic to you
Sorry.
a little closer, yes,
Little closer.
because,
Yeah,
thank you.
Sorry about that. So we have an environment, a belief system as Jamaicans in our environment that doesn't really serve us well when it comes to how we live with and enjoy life with the elderly. And sometimes it even impacts how the elderly see themselves, right? So a big part of legislation and a big part of what we do as government is around how we change that environment and create a space in which we can have a more positive view and a positive experience. And so I was able to listen to the last two sittings of this committee, and I really want to acknowledge all the work Professor Eldemar continues to do and has done for most of her life, yes. And Ms. Latiba there, as I walked her up outside, I said, like, from my perspective, we need an army of social workers, so I'm very happy to have that conversation. And the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, who has the primary responsibility at this time. And I think probably will continue to have it. Yeah? But I am not going to attempt to repeat the context. I think we all know what the overall statistics are and where we are at as a country with respect to an aging population. Yeah? But instead today what I want to do is to suggest a framework, and I am thinking that I'm not suggesting it as brand new. I suggested it in my original submission, but I know that there is congruence in that suggestion because I see the members from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security carrying that base document with them, which would be the UN and Johns Hopkins model law for the elderly care. Yeah. And I want to also reinforce in looking at that the legislative framework, 3 areas that I do believe are critical, not exclusive, but critical to the framework that will help us to have a better life for the elderly in Jamaica. And that is a community-centered social inclusion, right? Facilitated by a family-centered approach to social work. And I listened to Ms. Anderson, I think it was, from St. Thomas in her presentation, and a lot of that was she really went into that vision of that community-centered environment for elderly life. And then the second one is the economic empowerment of older adults. As we are an aging population, with our retirement age as it is, there is a gap in the ability of individuals as they age to be able to support themselves. And as I listen to the conversation, a critical part of that support is of empowerment and that comfort that will come as we age is to be able to support yourself and not become a dependent, right? You must be able to live a good life, be able to eat a nutritious meal every day. And there are many of our elderly in Jamaica who cannot eat a nutritious meal every day and who live in less than dignified standards of housing and are not able to get adequate health care. It's a big part of our population, right? Our elderly population. So, and in that regard as well, as we expand as an aging population, then we need to develop and modernize and regulate our care economy. So the legislation now must support a really robust care economy, not just creating homes, but creating a framework that will protect both the client and the worker in that space. Because care work is not often valued well in our country. You know, it's one of those that we take advantage of, I think. So, in that regard, I will also borrow from Ms. Mackenzie and the good company, right? How she segmented the elderly into the older person and the seniors. I rather like that segmentation because the needs are different in those segments. And so we would have to treat with them differently in the legislation. And I think it must be distinct in our legislation as we go through. And this, I would also want to add to that over the last 2 months, because of my current political activity, I've had the opportunity to have over 20 community meetings across the constituency and it's across the social classes at different levels, talking to them about what their vision is for their community for the next 10 years. So of course, in that conversation, the issues are going to come out, right? And the issues are going to come out for the different segments. And the issues that came up for the elderly in that would have been poor housing conditions, food insecurity, you know, being able to have access to at least one nutritious meal a day, loneliness, transportation, the income, the lack of the opportunities to earn. And this is especially so for the older adult segment. The elderly really wanted to just be able to enjoy the rest of their life. And then access to medical care, and then caregiver challenges. And the caregiver challenges here, what we found when we were doing the consultations and the conversations was that the caregiver was also in the elderly class, right? There were older adults looking after elderly, the senior adults. And so we have to really look at that and how that works. So they now shared their vision of what they wanted to see. And it was heartwarming to me that when you go into a community and they start to say, okay, so what do we want to do for the next 10 years? And they want to create a feeding program to ensure that all of the elderly in their community have at least one nutritional meal per day. So, you know, what I got from it is that we actually care about our older people in our country. We just need a framework and a legislative framework and a programmatic framework in which we can thrive and express that care and love in a different kind of way. And so they were very clear that they needed community spaces to interact and have fun with each other, right? They want to play them bingo, they want to play them domino, and they want to drink them beer on a Sunday evening. They want to have some spaces. And in Augustown in particular, they had a whole vision around having these paved sidewalks with benches on there where we would come out in the evening and everybody would be sitting out on them benches talking. Because a lot of these communities are communities where people live on the streets most of the time and they go into their homes too. So how we create that physical environment is going to be important. And I know some of this is programmatic, but you have to know what the vision is if you're going to create the legislation that might cause it, from my perspective. And what also came up in one of the communities was the daycare spaces where the elderly who are in need of having somebody with them, but not necessarily having to have like full-time medical care, that there could be a space where they could go and they could be independent except for the small piece of care that they need, or somebody to maybe serve the meal for them because maybe at this point they're shaking a little too much or something is happening physically for them. But having those spaces where they could also interact as well as to be in a safe space while the caregiver is able to go to work, and then they can come home and go home together. So that was an interesting one for me too as well. And then the other one that came up was that we should put, we talked about wellness and exercise and things, that we must put sidewalk gyms. It's a concept I gather that's, they see it quite often in China, they see it in India, where you're just walking along the sidewalk and there's a gym there, you can stop and you can exercise, etc. So it's like a community gym, but it's wide open and it's not in a enclosed space. So the idea of how we treat with wellness and make it be a part of our life. And then this one, every community asks for this, a mobile health system, bringing the health care once a month into the community so they could get their checkups. Because it was so difficult to get to the clinic, to get to the hospital, to get to the doctor's office. How do we bring health care to them, right? And for me, these elements and this fact that we care so much about our people this is what would support our community-based environment for our elderly. That presentation that Ms. Anderson did, because at the base of it, at the core of it, Jamaicans love each other. And they want to exist in a very positive space with each other. And we just need to create that space for them. Now, our older people want to be independent. So it was also very clear, right? So they wanted to know why whenever time you come into the community, you come in with vocational training, it's only for up to 35 years old. What about us who now didn't get that opportunity, or we worked in a laborer's job for most of our lives, we don't have that job anymore, and we want to be able to transition to be able to earn, right? And then the entrepreneurial support for older people. All of our frameworks in Jamaica, really most of the entrepreneurial framework are geared towards younger people. So how do you create that entrepreneurial class that starts at 50 to 55, so that by the time you get to being a part of the elderly group, you have cash flow earning, you have some earning that you can look after yourself. That is an important part of it. There's one element that I didn't write here, and I had a brief discussion with Denise while we were in the lobby waiting, was the issue of the reverse mortgage. Been tried many times, Denise tells me, in Jamaica. But I think we need to look at a framework that would be able to make it work. Because the big asset that the elderly have is their home. But they don't want to lose it. They want to be able to leave something for their children too. So if we can put some guardrails around the extent to which you can give a reverse mortgage on a home, and then how it is. But if you borrow against your home, yes, you're going to have to pay it back, right? So somebody will have to pay it back. But then you can look at it in the context of intergenerational mortgages as well, and how you look at that, right? So I think there's some opportunity there, and we can find creative ways and creative frameworks. Now, those would have to go into other legislations and not necessarily the Elderly Care Act. But for me, the UN model law gave enough of a basis and a framework for us to be able to have a consolidated legal framework to deal with elderly care. And I say this because our Charter of Fundamental Rights, right, does not really call out the elderly as a group, and I heard Denny speak to it last week, May 27th, right? And so this speaks to rights that are agreed, that are not controversial, that we believe that all of our elderly have. So it's created in two sections, the rights and the duty of care. And so where now it begins to have teeth after defining the rights is in the duty of care, right? So the rights that are there, the rights to dignity, and this is where we'd have to deal with the issue of the housing, your food security, the right to freedom from abuse, neglect, or exploitation. How do we create the regulations now that create the safe houses, etc., to support that right? And then the right to freedom from discrimination, ageism. And please let me just be very clear. I know I'm in a room with two lawyers and lots of people with enough experience in legislation. I'm giving a layman's perspective. Yes, yes. Right to freedom from discrimination, right to adequate health care, and how do we make sure that it is accessible? And I want to point out, and I use the word accessible here, because there was a conversation that was occurring in the two sittings that I listened to, where it came up, like I said, older people want to be able to still go to the post office to pick up their check. And that's our current older people. When we write this legislation, we have to remember that we want to write this legislation so it can last many generations. Now, when my daughter becomes elderly, I don't think she's going to want to pick up a check. You understand? But she just wants to make sure it is accessible to her. And by that time, it might have evolved for her children for it to be able to access it differently. Yeah? So we have to be clear in our language that we're talking about accessibility, and accessibility looks different for each generation. And we have to remember that. And so right now, for the healthcare, because maybe by that time, the accessibility is to make sure you have online healthcare, online access, right? And we can't imagine everything else that will come with it, right? And the right to maintenance. Now, this one I also know could become a very vexed one, right? Because, and I think I heard you, Senator Golden Campbell, asking the question, when it comes up in the court, how you enforce it. Because if you are the child who did not have the support of your parents growing up, how do you then relate to having to support your parents? Now, I think we need to work through how we bridge that gap. And I think we need to look at that under the duty of care and how it is that we tie that in with our social work and rebuild our families. Because if we leave things to fester, we can't fix every problem. But there must be a loophole in there, and I want us to think about that, and I wanted to speak to it a little later. And of course, the right to material assistance, the right to participation in society. Much was made of this, and everybody must agree with this. But the big one here is the economic participation. How do we create, and the social and economic participation, how we create that? And it is a mindset that going to shift this conversation around autonomy. Because immediately if you find that you are, as a member of a family, assisting somebody else in your family, you believe that you can take away their autonomy. Because sometimes we confuse assistance with control. Yeah? And we have to make sure how we distinguish that and how we change the mindset so we do not get to that space where we believe that we direct the elderly, but we work with them. We are partnering with them as you would partner in any family, as adults, as husband and wife, as mother and child, but as two adults to make the family work, right? And so the right to work, retiring in Jamaica, rarely comes with a livable pension. And what we need to create that legal framework to support earning after retirement. And one of the examples I'd give for this is in creating an environment that encourages entrepreneurship. the proposal has put on the table that a new company would not get taxed for 3 years would fit very neatly into this. So we have to look at those frameworks that encourage entrepreneurship, but just make sure they are not they do not have a age limit on them, because that's where the ageism comes in, and where we now do not have the access for the older adult as an elderly, member of the elderly. So, in duty of care. Duty of care has 3 sections: the duty of caregivers, the duty of the family, and the duty of the state. I'll start with the duty of the state. So, our duty, right, as a state, is to deal with the regulations and the legal support. And I'm talking about legal support here in the context of many of the elderly have a challenge because they are in either buying a property, or, as we spoke about, the strata situations, etc. And they need some form of legal aid, legal support, to be able to guide them through that system so they don't end up in a very vulnerable space, right? The protection is the material assistance, but for me the key would be the family-centered social worker, support for the family in carrying out their duty. So when you talk about the Maintenance Act, when you put a whole family together, from child to parent to grandparent, and if great-grandparents are alive, the great-grandparents, their issues are often interconnected, and they are often coming from a similar source. And so if you treat with the whole family, you can find some commonalities that can unlock. And there are some cases where you will be able to have a positive relationship with the elderly and the younger persons in that family. But there are some cases, as Denise was pointing out, where the elderly just don't want to have anything to do with them, where they just want to be alone. But oftentimes that's because of the mindset that you're controlling rather than living together and enjoying life together, right? Now, and being family don't mean that you have to live under the same roof. Being family just means that you are connected, and there are some connections that will cause you to have some commonality in purpose. And then you can treat with that, right? And as I said, facilitating entrepreneurship for the persons over 50. And then the developing of the care economy. And that care economy might also solve some of the problems for the older person being able to earn in some cases, right? And because we have to look at it in long-term care, short-term care, and home-based care. And we're going to have to create now as I was hearing in the other presentations, the training for the different types of caregivers, right? But also putting in the protection in the law, right? Right, Senator Gill? Protection in the law for those workers, because the caregivers do not have a lot of protection in the law, and oftentimes are on contract or a day's work, and should not really be treated simply in the Domestic Workers Act. I think this needs to be something that we really develop as we are developing, not Act, the Domestic Workers Framework, sorry, not Act, sorry. But we need to look at how it is that we are developing this industry effectively and the framework for it. So we have the, am I frozen now? Okay. And I'm just quoting here the ILO resolution on decent work and the care economy, because there is actually a resolution on this that was passed in June 2024 that we have to look at as we are really, and we have to be very purposeful around developing this economy and not just make it happen by chance, right? So we have to look then at the legislations that now are going to support this, especially the Nursing Home Registration Act. I believe that should be repealed, and inside of this Elderly Care Act, we really create a good framework for the care economy, right? The Maintenance Act, I believe, the duty and care of the family, could be expanded and be placed inside of one act. right? And not necessarily being the Maintenance Act as one of the things. And then the Human Services Act of 2018, which became from the Poor Relief Act, has two elements in there, the adult residential care and the medical care, to look at how it is that we work with that act, right? And I also want to recommend that we examine the possibility of expanding the role of the family court. Because if we're going to look at the family, right, then if we have a framework that understands the family and a court that can dispense with these matters more quickly and more efficiently, right, I think it would better serve the legislative guidance and to better serve the clients that would need this service. And as I said, the family-centered social worker. And what do I mean by this, right? So for the purposes of this proposal, as I say, we define it family across the three generations, parents, children, and the grandparents, and where necessary, the great-grandparents if they are alive. And then this family care social worker would be assessing the status of the family and helping to chart a pathway for social mobility. Because social mobility is key, right? Everybody wants to improve in life every day. Nobody wants to stay where them is, right? And to identify the social protection opportunities. So right now you can have social protection where two members of a family are getting social protection, but another member is not. And so the whole family is not treated with. And then you have challenges coming out of that and tensions coming out of that, right? To connect family members to the services and paraprofessionals necessary. We had a lot of talk around the mental health of the elderly. That these social workers wouldn't be able to manage that, but you would need to be able to connect them where necessary, right? And, you know, when you envision this in keeping with the whole community vision, these social workers would be within a community, working from the community centers, serving families in clusters in the community. So if we are able to do this, we could walk hand in hand with our families. You know, we talk a lot about parenting in Jamaica. We talk a lot about the breakdown of the family structure. And this would help to strengthen that. And in strengthening that, you strengthen every aspect of the family, including elderly care. And it would strengthen the intergenerational support and awareness, right? So we speak to social inclusion, we speak to social protection, social mobility, and the social cohesion through the family values, yes? So the structures that would support the effectiveness, and I think that should be supported by the law, would be the creation. We have the elderly council, but we need to strengthen the elderly council or the commission. I know that Jean Lorichin was speaking more to a commission. I know that the elderly council exists, but I think it needs to be strengthened in the context of the law and have the responsibility of the review of the implementation of the law. And this would allow the law to be, the implementation and the programs that you put in to support it, to be able to adapt to the changing world as our elderly expands, right?
Mrs.
And
Duncan Sutherland, let me interrupt you there.
Yeah.
How would you see the council being strengthened? When you say strengthened under the law, what does that look like for you?
I think that it should be given some powers with respect to the programmatic review and to like an advisory council, like, you know, when you have the in the Child Care and Protection Act, there's an advisory council for the Child Care and Protection Act that has oversight over the programs and how you execute, et cetera, et cetera. I think if they got that level of authority within the law, I don't think they have it now. I know that it exists, but I don't think, because we don't have a law that it would have oversight over.
Yeah, I think the council now operates with a board.
Yeah.
Is it an advisory board? An advisory board,
Advisory
yes.
board. So it wouldn't be much different in the structure, but just more in relation to the content of the law and the rights as defined in the law. So if you have an Elderly Care Act that defines the rights and defines the duty of care of the state, of the family, of the caregiver, then in that context you could strengthen their ability to have that oversight. So it's not just a ministerial oversight.
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, man, that's from my perspective. And then I would support, in addition to that, and I heard you talking about it a lot, Senator Golden, Campbell, the elderly advocate, because that is the avenue through which you would get that legal support and to get that heightened protection of a very vulnerable group, right? And as was said, you know, a lot of times the abuse that takes place is by family members, right? And so it's hard if you don't have an advocate to be able to walk with you in that process, because you're not going to want to report it. Because, you know, you sit down there and you're just wondering how my picnic could have done me that after all I want me to do for them, right? So, and then for me, I heard the conversation around, and I know that the, what's the new name for the poor relief? I did just tell you a while ago, I don't remember it now. Anyway, but that act is governed by local government, right? But this act, I think, should be governed by, should remain with the Ministry of Social Security. And then we should look at what should be the interplay and how would this act reference the renewed, I don't know why I can't remember the name now, renewed Local Government Act, the Poor Relief Act, right? And so, for me, in summary, we really need to be looking at a framework that transforms the lives of our elderly and not a framework that just protects them. And so as we rewrite, or as we begin to draft and create the matrix that would inform that draft, we have to have that framework of transformation in our minds, right? So the legislative framework will be there, and I believe that if we so empower a council and so empower the social workers and be very clear in our objectives of the act, that we are creating an environment of not just of protection, but to promote the empowerment, independence, happiness, and respect, ensuring a continuity of purpose in the lives of our elderly. That needs to be explicit. We mustn't be afraid to use that language in the act. And that's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Duncan Sutherland. Members, do I have any questions, any follow-up questions for Mrs. Sutherland? Senator Gill.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Duncan Sutherland. You know, it appears that you may have been a kind of fly on the wall during these deliberations, because even though you would have represented varying areas, there's a common thread running through these presentations in terms of, you know, the duty of care that is required. And there's a saying that if something is good, it's worth repeating.
Yeah.
And the common thread is important. And, you know, active learning is when you listen from different presenters. Mm-hmm. And you might get the same perspective, but in a different way. Yes. You know, the mobile health care jumps out at me, and it jumped out because of the community engagement that would have been required. I recall growing up with a mobile library.
Yes.
Every Friday evening in Gordon Town at about 3 o'clock, I would go and get my book and return it the next Friday. And so in this case, that for those remote communities, the presenter last time in St. Thomas, the mobile that mobile health center would be a kind of key initiative. I want to ask you to expand on two particular areas of interest. The first one for me is a real distinction in the right to work versus the entrepreneurial promotion. Because we would have heard many speaking about, you know, the ability to work beyond retirement age, yeah, and the preparation. So maybe you could expand on that, and also this reverse mortgage.
Yes.
Yes, I would want you to elaborate on those two areas for me.
Okay. All right. So in the context of the right to work, there are many people who, when they reach the retirement age, don't really want to stop working. So you'd have to, in that context, look at what then are the ways in which we can get them to have the opportunities to earn.
Yeah.
Because you really want to work, not just because you want to go to work. Sometimes you want to go to work because you like the social activity at work as well. But apart from that, you really want to earn. You want to be able to maintain your independence and to maintain your lifestyle. And so we would have to work through how it is that we prepare our workforce for retirement and how it is that we prepare them to be able to continue to earn. Because as I say, I am very, very few Jamaicans have a pension that they can actually live on. Very few, you know? And so it is something that we have to treat with, right? There is also the issue of the reverse mortgage. So you have an asset, you have a house, and you're going to live much longer than it costs you to pay off the house. So you can get now your value out of it with a reverse mortgage where the bank will pay you now and hold the asset. And you do it as a monthly payment or a quarterly payment, depending on what the arrangement is. Now, the issue with it, because Denise was telling me it was tried several, because it's not a novel idea. It has been tried several times in Jamaica, but there was resistance because people didn't want to lose their house and they felt this was a thing that they were giving to their children. Right? And you know, we have a thing with borrowing in Jamaica. A lot of Jamaicans have a challenge with borrowing. So, but I believe that culture is changing because our credit is growing. Our consumer credit is growing in Jamaica and people are looking to borrow. And I believe it is something that the NHT themselves, because there are some of those homes that the commercial banks wouldn't participate in that activity. But the NHT could look at it. Right? And depending on the context of the ownership, whether there are children or not, in some cases there are no children, that could continue and it could go back into the NHD pool for resale. Or if there are children, you can work through how you put a cap on it in terms of the amount that you can take off of the equity of the house. So I think it is something that we should explore and put some guardrails around.
Thank you.
We thank you very much, and we thank you for coming and for sharing with us. Do I have online? Yes. Senator Fraser-Brinz.
Thank you, Chairman, and let me thank Mrs. Patricia Duncan-Smith for her very detailed presentation. There are several things that she said which really jumped out at me, and what I like, Chairman, was something that we have been talking about for a long time, which is really how do we get the country to come behind or to come with us on this new journey. And what I particularly liked from the presentation was the community-centered approach that she mentioned. And, you know, Chairman, I'm listening to her and I'm thinking that it is so good. So when she talks about the sidewalk and the exercise, the need for healthy elderly persons and the gym, it occurred to me that, you know, when we develop communities for all residents, then we don't have to have specific activities or specific institutions. In other words, if we develop a community for all the residents, bear in mind the young, the middle-aged, and the elderly, then you'll find that all groups are able to enjoy the facilities. So with this community-centered approach that I interpret Mrs. Duncan Sutherland as speaking about, then you find, for example, that our community centers can become that daycare that she spoke about. You find that the football field can become the center of the hub of activity or outdoor activities for the older persons in the daytime when the younger ones are either at work or at school. And it is something that I am particularly pleased to hear, and I'm very grateful for her presentation in that regard. The issue of the reverse mortgage, and I know that it is something that in recent times persons have been talking about, but for us in Jamaica, as Mrs. Eldemar Shera said, Prof said, we've tried it, but we have just not been successful. And I think a part of it has to do with just our culture as people. But more so, it has to do with the insecurity that our elderly feel, because most of them become retirees at the point when they would consider the reverse mortgage. And because of that, the proposal, and I know Senator Gale mentioned it, of the right to work, but I don't want to call it a right to work, but the need for greater economic engagement of the elderly becomes even more important. Because if the elderly feel secured that they are going to earn enough to cover these payments, then the vulnerability that they feel, or which comes necessary from entering into a mortgage for some persons, particularly elderly, would be far less. And you know, I know it is something to be discussed at another place with another grouping. However, I think it's something that, should it be discussed for the elderly, should involve the discussion around how do we engage the elderly economically, because that also brings about some kind of independence and also some kind of security. So those are really my two comments, Chair. And like you, I thank Mrs. Sutherland, Duncan Sutherland, for her contribution.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sophie. And I note that. And as I said, I do believe that the reverse mortgage is going to require quite a bit of conversation, because it's going to require a mindset change. It is not one where they would pay back that mortgage, that reverse mortgage that they don't pay back. It's at the end of when you will that home, whoever gets it has that mortgage now to pay, right? So it goes to the children.
Yeah, that's
So
definitely
it's
one
like an intergenerational mortgage.
And that's definitely one that's going to require some deep research and conversation as to the mechanism.
Absolutely, Chair.
with
Absolutely.
how
A
that
lot
They want
more
to do it
discussion.
and how to do it. But guess what happened? I am actually aware of a few Jamaicans who have done it, to support their income, right? And it's, of course, a discussion that they have had with their children.
Okay. I would be interested in hearing some case studies. I'll speak to you after.
Yes.
Very well. I think I have Senator Longmore, Senator Dr. Longmore.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, and good morning to the committee. Thank you for your presentation, Mrs. Duncan Sutherland. I also would like to recognize the alignment with initiatives that have been suggested before in terms of
Senator
the community
Longmore,
approach,
we lost
the
you a while
family
ago.
centeredness
Are you hearing us?
of such approaches. Sorry?
We lost you. You were coming in and out. You also wanted to...
The connection might be a bit difficult.
Yes, try again from alignment.
Right, the alignment with some of the presentations that we've had, and the especially the centered on community and family approach. Particularly though, want just focus on the too far. Right here in the Caribbean, we're seeing that this is being initiated in quite a few of our Caribbean neighbors. But also recognize too that, you know, the initiatives of the UDC, especially with, you know, the green space development, it's not just about the physical well-being of the individual. These green spaces for mindfulness, for community exercise, etc., could go a far way, and we're seeing quite a few of those being done throughout Jamaica. So I'm really very appreciative of the endorsement of that approach. But what I would say is that we know with this awareness for the elderly, we need to streamline, and especially in those developments, seek to provide for those specific age groups in those spaces, the renovations of parks that we're seeing across the country, the community centers. Let us streamline those with the age-specific focus. Regarding the reverse mortgage, interestingly, based on the presentation that we had last week, where we had this individual who presented the circumstance of, you know, fees being outstanding, etc. Quite a few persons actually reached out to me with this very same suggestion, but within the limitations of particular amounts being removed from such mortgage. I'm not the financial person here, but I think that it is definitely something, and we're hearing a commonality in this possible approach to allow for persons to have this, who have earned such equity, to be able to liquidate some of that within restrictions, and to have that in collaboration with a will and with future planning, that becomes available to them in real time, so they're not incurring debt in their later stages. So most definitely that is something that I would hope that we can expand on, and however you can provide input there further, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yes.
Lastly, retirement age. I'm a definite advocate for utilizing, you know, this goes to when we crafted our laws that was fitting a different society. We're having an aging population. Our populations are much more cognizant and cognitively capable. And I am one of those who certainly advocate that the years of experience and expertise should not be put out to pasture for those persons who reach quote-unquote retirement age. And so I am one of those who strongly advocate for us to review that capacity for persons to be income generating at those later stages in life. Thank you again for your presentation.
Okay,
much appreciated.
If I may, I just wanted to thank you very much, Sapphire. The Senator, sorry, yes. On the issue of the community and the community development, and we have elements of it, you know, community development has always been a feature of Jamaica. But I think the time has come for us to now be a lot more purposeful around how we create these communities, and with a much clearer objective in mind. Yes, for the elderly, but for how we all live together, to the point that Sophie was making. I don't believe that we have, in this moment, we've put up a lot of community centers, for example, but we haven't put them to effective use because we were not purposeful enough in what they were for. We knew we needed a community center. The community called for the community center, but we never have a framework in which to make them effective and to strengthen our communities. And we never used it, and I'm saying this, to strengthen our families. We say that we are concerned about our values and our attitudes and our family structures in our country. The only way to fix it is to be purposeful and to pour into our people, right? It won't happen organically. It won't happen because we put the bench on the sidewalk. It won't happen just because those things happen. We actually have to have the people in the space working, the social workers, We actually have to have the legal framework that supports it, and we have to have the clear objectives as to what the communities must be able to achieve and what the families must be able to achieve. We want a bigger middle class in Jamaica. To get that, we have to be purposeful.
Thank you. I think Senator Gabriela Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for not being able to turn on my camera, but I just wanted to thank Mrs. Duncan Sutherland for her presentation. I particularly as well would like to hear more about the mortgage issue, because it sounds as if that may be a way to encourage generational wealth. And I believe that there are many young persons as well in Jamaica who would be interested in hearing more about that situation and how it can actually build our families. The second thing that I appreciated from the presentation, Ms. Duncan Sutherland, is the emphasis on how we can build intergenerational community and intergenerational community. Our community centers, I believe, as well, can be put to better use. For example, I noted in Northwest St. Anne, there are a few elderly groups. However, they aren't well supported. And as well, they're always in looking for spaces to hold their activities. So I believe that our community centers can be used as those spaces. Just to encourage activity, socialization. I believe in another presentation, somebody said that one of the activities that seniors use as a means of socialization is going to the post office. And I think we can do a lot more in creating activities and spaces where our elderly population can build their own communities and find enjoyment, and also transmit those skills and values that they have honed over the years. So I think that there is indeed a place and a necessity for us to be deliberate about creating those spaces for our elderly population to thrive. I would also say as well that when we look at the economic empowerment of our elderly population, in my mind, I'm not convinced that raising the retirement age might be the solution, but I heard mention of entrepreneurial support and training as well as skill training. This might be a means through which our seniors later in life, can use to enhance their streams of income. And so I commend that suggestion, and I believe that it's something that we should consider as we move forward with this legislation. What are the ways that we can get more seniors moving into entrepreneurship and being able to provide for themselves, especially with the concerns around social security and pensions, that so many of our seniors seem to be crying out about. I believe that this can be a solution to help them to further sustain themselves and, build financial security at that stage in life. So those are my few comments, but I want to thank you for your detailed presentation. And as I said, I look forward to more information on the mortgage idea, because that one was, I think it was a unique suggestion, and I'd love to hear more. And I think the country would also benefit from hearing more on that. So if you could provide more information, that would be appreciated as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Morris. Mrs. Duncan Sutherland, I'm looking at the time. I want to thank you very much again for coming. Colleagues, we're at 10 to 12, so I'm going to go straight to the Mona Aging and Wellness, and I'm assuming Prof. Shera will take the mic shortly. I do want to say, though, some comments just in terms of our deliberations this morning, and I continue to do this at every meeting, because it's important for us to have a holistic discussion about issues and concerns in relation to how we treat with our aging population and how we treat with the needs and the concerns of older people. But there is a distinction that needs to be remembered and appreciated, and that is that there are programs and policies that require the implementation by administrative bodies and administrative arms that are not appropriate matters for distilling in a piece of law. So we must, the question of rights and duties is quite appropriate for law, essential in law, because it is law that establishes that in an enforceable way. But when we talk about other things like mindfulness programs and community centers to a lesser extent, those are not necessarily things that we are looking at capturing in the legislation we're talking about. So I'm speaking to all concerned, but also just a reminder to my own colleagues and a reminder to myself, because a lot of the information that we have had the benefit of hearing is new information to us, is very insightful information to us, and so we can get carried away in our own learning process and endeavors. But we are really focused on what of the matters that have come to us are matters that need to be captured in law and need to be dealt with in law. And that is not to say that other matters do not in fact impact those deliberations as well, because they do. So I just want to make that distinction. Again, Prof, you have the floor, ma'am.
And good morning to everyone, senators and members here. Thank you for this opportunity to reply to questions raised. Mrs. Beckford did share a long list with me, and she did point out that I would need to research the answers, which was also accurate. So I'm going to focus on these replies. Interestingly enough, all of the questions that I got did apply to the rights. MAWC stands by its recommendation that we need a rights bill, that we have to set the foundation for any of our other legislation by recognizing that older people have specific rights related. We're trying to get there, Chair. Next. Okay. So one of the questions was, is it a standalone? The answer is no. The proposed Bill of Rights is to supplement what we already have. The Bill of Rights of 1948, amended in 2012, which speak to the basic rights around health, etc. But the Bill of Rights of older people would address the specific rights of persons over 60. We were asked to define the age. We all signed the Vienna Convention in 1982, which set the age at 60. That has not been changed yet, although persons have changed the retirement age. 60 at the time was the retirement age. But the Bill of Rights for older persons would be similar to the Bill of Rights for persons with disabilities, and to children, recognizing rights not covered by the Bill of Rights. Where am I? Okay, so the proposed bill, and this was also a question, is rooted in international conventions and frameworks. We have been talking about the rights of older people in the international community for close on 20 years. It includes the recommendations from the Madrid Plan of Action, the UN Principles for Older Persons 1999, and the work of the UN General Assembly, which has been addressing this issue since 2005. They've actually had 13 sessions on it. I actually attended one for the government, culminating in November 2024, calling on governments to develop an internationally binding document to promote, protect, and ensure the recognition and realization on an equal basis of all human rights of older persons. I would add to this that the matter was also addressed last year at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. Dul Adel was there, And more recently, the recommendations from the Commonwealth heads of government were accepted in May at the WHO General Assembly, all pointing to the need for rights. Why rights? Legal structure and environment was a question. So it's a legal instrument. The rights would be a legal instrument which would bring clarity to older persons' rights and set the tone for what else is being proposed. It would codify the rights in one document while recognizing the challenges, act as a tool to identify unjust or prejudicial acts while challenging the myths and stereotypes. It would require government to collect data, which is something we don't have. We do not have regular data on the 60 and over. Statin, for example, talks to 65 and over. The health data, the 5-year bans, because children are 0 to 15, we end at 65. So as we plan and look to protect, we have gaps in the data collection. It would generate clarity and guidance for civil society to work alongside government, so that civil society, the advocates like ourselves, would recognize what the rights are. And Madam Chair, as you said, that we could not, you said to focus like on the legislation. Well, the Bill of Rights, if we had access in civil society, trade unions, Senator Gale, whatever, would know what we are protecting. It would increase the visibility of the importance of older persons. The only vulnerable group now that does not have its own Bill of Rights is, in fact, the older persons. It would guide policy change and advocacy and would raise public awareness. So the rights of older persons that find, and Mrs. Duncan Sutherland actually helped me here, because we do have research on what older people see as specific threats: pensions, access to health care, access to goods and services, support in care situations, protection from abuse, respect for dignity and autonomy. The right to choice keeps coming up, and the right to choose. So the Bill of Rights as proposed would include, as I said last time, I am not a lawyer. Therefore, I am throwing this out for the more legal minds to take into consideration, and of course to add from other presentations. But they would be the age-related human rights relevant to daily life that protect the freedom of older persons to control their lives. The aging process, while not causing disease, and I must stress that, does introduce age-specific challenges because the risk factors are longer, the family breakdown that we have talked about, the demographic challenges that are currently in the news. So there are things that are impacting on the rights of older people. These include the environmental changes that's shared by the persons with disabilities. And that act now, in fact, covers most of the environmental changes that would be needed for older persons. The right to independence and autonomy, if capable, recognizing there are cases, dementia, other problems that would remove that, but we'd have to put in the legal safeguards, and you'll see that when we mention it, and of course the abuse prevention. So the rights would include the need for long-term care, the access to health care. The Care and Protection Act would spell out how these would be done. So the rights will set the foundation. The access to social services, the prevention of ageism and discrimination based on age. Why bother? You're too old. As I sit here listening to the discussions, I can hear the young people saying, yes, all you want to do is keep jobs from us. I can hear the ageism. I have heard it repeatedly. Note, pensions is a key component. The committee would have to decide if pensions are adequately covered by the various acts we have on pensions, or if it would go in here, perhaps the right to an adequate pension. I actually have some reservations, and I speak now for me, not for MAWC, as I believe that there is a responsibility on the part of people to provide for their pension. And I don't know that we can protect adequate pensions as a country. I think we can ensure that persons have the knowledge and all of that. So I actually have some reservations about pensions here. In the discussions that we've been having, the proposed bill considered the Universal Declarations, which set out the fundamentals of dialogue, spelling out what is needed to guarantee rights. Several have been reviewed, like the UN Convention, but I must mention the regional one, the Inter-American Convention on the Rights of Older Persons, originating out of Argentina, but supported by ECLAC, the Economic Community in Latin America and the Caribbean. So we do have the base, and we have, in what we are proposing, we have drawn on the existing instruments. And all of them focus on how to increase equality in older age. How can we ensure that older persons have the opportunities and are protected? The consensus in the Caribbean, as it is internationally, is that a new convention stroke bill, we've moved away from the convention now to the bill because individual countries have problems with one or two of the clauses in the convention, and the UN in 2024 have then given countries the authority to go ahead with their own Bill of Rights, and it would spell out the specifics. International human rights laws lay down obligations for government, and we have used some of those obligations in things that we have signed to act in a way, but also to refrain in others. Domestic implementation, and we have heard that repeatedly. We heard it in the earlier presentation that some things need to be strengthened. So this Bill of Rights that would be local, move through our parliament, etc., would look to the Jamaican situation, the Jamaican people, and the culture of our older people. How are rights protected? We know this, but I had to put it in to remind myself. Keep stressing I'm not a lawyer. I have no legal mind at all. But there are several ways. There are rights instruments, there are courts, tribunals, the Constitution, but all recognize that human rights create a legal duty on public authorities, not just government. Civil society, private sector, the rights create that legal authority. As has been said before, the government response is through the Ministry of Social Security and National Council for Senior Citizens. We have an established body since 1976. It has weathered all of the changes in the country. Let us strengthen it and ensure that it can continue to work. But rights need a legal framework. The Constitution, the law, the courts and tribunals, and the international conventions. Whose responsibility? Everybody. But let us start with government, because government does have a responsibility to protect the rights of all citizens. That does include its older people. Government has the responsibility to establish and maintain legal systems which are needed for this, to implement laws and policies. Also, government does have a responsibility about protection against all forms of abuse, violence and abuse. And this has come up in everybody's presentation. And government also has a responsibility to report in the international community. I mentioned WHO. We did, in fact, sign the thing coming out of WHO 2 weeks ago. Late May. So we go to the UN, we participate, we either say yes or we abstain. So government, the basis on which to report and the basis on which to participate in the international fora would come from this. Government's responsibility, as I said, would be through the Ministry of Social Security, recognizing a key role for the Ministry of Health and Wellness. You can't talk health without including them. Local government, because we talk about the abandonment and those kind of things. But there's also, at this stage, a key role for the Ministry of Justice and for Parliament, for this committee which has kick-started it, in defining the steps and initiating the process. I'm answering the questions, like how would we get to the Bill of Rights? There is a role for individuals and society. There is individual responsibility, and I think as we look, hopefully, to create a Bill of Rights, that we also include in that the responsibility of older persons themselves. Let us not take all responsibility away from them, and from us, sorry. Let me correct myself. Advocacy and awareness is a critical part of all of this. Many of us don't understand the aging process and what can happen and what we should do when we're in our 30s and our 40s. Aging didn't happen at 60. It started the day you were born. You celebrate the life's milestones when you're 13 and 21. Not many people celebrating 60. And we need to change that. We need to change the public perception. A Bill of Rights would go far to doing that. And of course, we want to guarantee civil society participation. We know there are differing views on how to protect rights. We have taken those into consideration. I guess all of us would say that all of us have an opinion and there's no one correct way. I still feel the Bill of Rights is the starting point of a correct way. I was asked about the difficulties envisioned. I do believe we're going to have some difficulty in getting buy-in from the policymakers. We've been calling for the Bill of Rights now for many years, but we're finally here, Madam Chair, and thanks to Senator Floyd and yourselves for this. We tend to be a youth-focused society. That has to change. By 2050, older people will be 1 in 4. It will be 25% of our population. Let us not forget that. Many of you will be here then, and we're talking about you then. Meeting costs to set up the structures. We have spoken about the need for various things. They are going to cost money. So there is a financial element to this, and I was warned by a minister of government, don't bring anything that's going to cost money. Monitoring and instituting a Bill of Rights is going to cost money. We have to monitor it and we have to enforce it. One question was, how will it protect autonomy? Which is the ability to act out of personal ethics and a desire when and if capable. We stress the if capable. Having the freedom and ability of making choices and decisions. Implementation of protecting autonomy is protected by the Bill of Rights because it states it to dignity, to choice, to independence. So, what is the oversight mechanism? We, Mona Aging and Wellness, does think that an older person's tribunal is the way to go. A commission was suggested. However, our research tells us that a tribunal is quasi-judicial. A commission is not. And we wanted something, or we wanted to suggest something that has a legal framework. It would primarily protect the rights of older persons, address disputes, provide support for older individuals, including matters of social security, legal capacity, and the access to justice. It would also play a role in promoting awareness of crimes against older people and ensuring that they have a voice in the criminal justice system. Why a tribunal? Because a tribunal has access to fast resolutions. We borrowed from several tribunals, IDT, the child one, the disability one. So we've actually looked at tribunals and how they operate in Jamaica. A mechanism for mediation and the court system, if we went the route of a law, first of all, a law is going to take you 10 to 20 years to enact. If you went through the older Bill on Rights, we'd get it a lot faster. And we think that the time to act is now. Not to say one is better than the other, just to say they go in serial things. So a tribunal, the merits of a tribunal are that the decisions are binding and are generally upheld unless it is determined that the tribunal acted outside of the law or ultra vires. In such cases, the decision is subject to judicial review, and Senator Gale no doubt will comment here based on his experience with the IDT. The specific powers and functions of the tribunal are usually defined by legislation. So, on this older persons tribunal, members could be, we have suggested the older person advocate, which is why I said there will be financial implications right from the start. Others have said an older person ombudsman. Whichever one is chosen doesn't matter, just somebody who speaks for the older person. The chair of the National Council for Senior Citizens, the voice of older persons through an older person, the social workers that are key to this, a healthcare representative, a legal person, and a medical person. There could also be a monitoring role for the implementation of the national policy for senior citizens residing in the tribunal, but it would be based on complaints, and somebody would have to bring to the tribunal that something was not happening. The tribunal would collaborate with government agencies. I've already mentioned the ministries concerned, and there could be others, non-profit organizations and other stakeholders to provide comprehensive support to older persons, for older persons. So, I've come to the end of our presentation on the questions of the rights. Senator Longmore, I have not addressed the question on assisted suicide. I'm going to stay away from that right now, Madam Chair. It was a question, and I acknowledge that it was a question attached to these questions. I think that's for another discussion, and I think that has to bring in the medical fraternity. So we would like to modify the original suggestion, clearly not on protecting the rights of older persons, but I think that what we had initially suggested, 2 pieces of legislation, the long-term care, the abuse, and the violence, and we now wish to modify that suggestion to say care and protection of older persons to include both care and protection from abuse and violence. I have included the 3 slides for completeness here. I am not going to go through them. We went through them before. But under what the legislation would cover, in keeping with the suggestion of merging the 2 into one legislative bill, it would cover the home-based care, residential care. I heard the suggestion to revise the Nursing Home Act. That would have to be looked at because the Nursing Home Act now covers maternity centers and other forms of care, such as some of the child care fall under here, and there are other things. So if we were going to repeal it, we'd have to take the older people out of it, but it would still need to be in place to cover the other forms of health care it covers. Support for caregivers, a workforce trained. Frameworks exist. We do have the WHO framework for long-term care. We also have some programs in the region, Chile and Uruguay. I, subsequent to typing this, found that the Caymans have a wonderful act on this, Cayman Islands. Chile actually speaks to abandonment, and they repealed their Maintenance Act and went with criminal penalties for abandonment. So we have stuff in the region that's working that we could look at. But additions now to this new proposal would be, it would have to include standards and regulations for all levels of homes, homes for older persons, assisted living, and nursing homes. Protection then would be, which would be the protection from abuse, violence, etc., would need to include the definitions. What constitutes abuse? What are the signs and symptoms? What are the signs and symptoms of neglect or exploitation? Notification, who notifies, to whom and where? Mandatory reporting, who must report and who can report? The issues around confidentiality of reporting and protection from liability are strong in some of the other legislations that I looked at, because we will have people who wish to create a little bit of discomfort and trouble and may report where things don't exist. So there has to be that in it. Protection orders. You do all of what we've just said and you find that somebody is being abused. They own the house. You're taking the older out, and it came up 2 weeks ago. How would you protect them? You're going to move them to a safe house and then the person doing the abuse take away the house? A lot of work has to go into this. And establish a system for reporting and investigation. What are the criminal penalties going to be? The caregiver training and regulations. And it will then have to include the protection of the older person with mental impairment. You notice I have said if capable on several occasions. So we're going to have definitions of that. Who certifies? Who says they're not capable? What are the procedures? So this may take time. So we stand by the original suggestion that while this is being worked on, that we still pursue looking at the existing laws that exist and adding clauses. The issue of abuse has got to be dealt with now. We can't wait. We started the Child Care Task Force in 1986. The Act came into being in 2007. We cannot wait 20 years for the laws to be formulated, etc. So we do have to do something now, and we suggest, in addition to starting the process for the law, that we look at the existing laws to strengthen what to do about abuse of older persons. Penalties and sanctions, I was asked that question. Those will be determined by more competent persons than myself, including the criminal people and the legal profession. So thank you. I've answered the questions that I received.
Prof. Shearer, you would know that every time you speak, we're going to have follow-up questions,
I
right?
did. Yes, yes.
I would ask you to talk a little bit about this question of the Bill of Rights versus the law, because a Bill of Rights is not just a term of art, and I don't think it really is a term of art here. We're not talking about a constitutional amendment, are we? Or are we talking about a statutory provision for the rights of older persons set out in statute? Can you clarify that?
Well, I can clarify it by saying I would love to see it go into the Constitution. And since we're in the middle of constitutional reform, I think we could go there. But I was thinking statutory along the same rights as the rights of the disabled and the children's rights.
Okay, thank you.
But my dream would be the Constitution.
Yes, we've had some cursory discussions about that, and whether that is the appropriate place. But we thank you for that contribution. Do I have any members with any follow-up questions?
No. I see no hands.
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair. I'm just dealing with multitasking here.
Go ahead, Senator Longmore.
Right. Not a question. Just thanking Prof. and fully understand the aversion to not wanting to respond to the assisted suicide, Prof. I'm quite. It's not unfamiliar for me to be probing some things that aren't on the current agenda, so to speak. But the fact of the matter is, it is something that is in the space amongst healthcare workers, as you indicated. It is something that has been brought to the attention of us as psychiatrists. And so, as we take the opportunity, and as the presenter before had indicated, some of the provisions that we are looking at here, we have to consider the technologies that are afoot and also the social issues and realities of not aging at this point in time, but aging in the future, as we have the opportunity to be crafting this legislation now. So, as I said, fully appreciate that it is nowhere near something that we would want to legislate for now, per se. I don't know, who knows? But it is certainly something that within the medical space, within especially my field, it has come to our attention. And there are Jamaicans who are at that age and stage contemplating such. So just to say, FYI, it is not totally unfamiliar to our society. But thank you so much again, and much appreciate your expertise as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Let me also point out that I have been asked. I myself have been asked.
There you go. Yeah, so it's a reality.
And when the person asked me, they told me how to do it. They had researched it enough to tell me what to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so it is a reality.
It's a reality.
So thank you again.
It's out there.
Yes. Thank you, Prof. Shearer. Senator Gill.
Thank you, Chair. Prof, we sent a list of questions to you, and I can say out of the list of questions, you got all right.
Thank you.
But the nature in which you responded, it gave you the opportunity to be very extensive in nature, to be very expansive, and even to answer to questions that we didn't ask, but answers that you provided. One of the things that was distilling for me, and it may be somewhat strategic in your part, is to identify for us what is if capable. And the if capable, as a committee, we are going to take it as, in the first instance, look at those low-hanging fruits that we can work towards, that we can expand on, whether we take pieces from some other legislation and morph it into one. But there's the other dimension to it, which I believe is also critical. What are those priority areas that we need to act on now? And you provided them to us. So I want to personally thank you for the expansive nature in which you delivered the responses, and I'm looking forward to getting that part of the presentation. You know, we don't have to copy these questions, but we can have them for review in terms of the answers that is going to really help this committee. One of the things I'm taking away from it also is the fact that this is going to require extensive work. Yes. It is not the kind of journey that you are going to arrive at a destination. It's like we're going to have to work at this growing older into achieving this kind of legislation. And as you know, as we go along, we are going to be picking up other pieces as we work through it. So I want to thank you for the expansive response, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Senator Gale. Do I have any other questions from members to Prof. Shero? I must say, members, and it was remiss of me just to acknowledge the Ministry of Labor and the team from the Ministry of Labor. The Chief Technical Director, I see Mrs. Dear Williams is here. I see the head of the National Council, Mrs. Morrison. I see our chairman, Dr. McCoy. How are you? And I know Mr. Watson, our legal counsel at the ministry, is also here. Is there anything that you wish to add to the discussions this morning, or any clarification that you would wish to bring on any of the matters?
Morning, Senator. Morning to all the members, and pleasant, well, afternoon, no, my apologies. Afternoon to everyone. What we would, first of all, I'd like to thank both presenters. The presentations were quite informative. It does show us that we have a lot of work to do, which shall include a lot of further research. I would just want to echo the sentiments, however, that this process of arriving at a elderly care legislation, in my view, is going to be quite extensive. As we would have noted, elderly care to me is a very multifaceted thing, or multifaceted area, which means that it will require work between a lot of departments of government. To me, it's going to also require us to do a large and extensive gap analysis as to where we are currently as a country with regard to elderly care. And it's also going to require us to do a comparative analysis in that regard to what is currently in place in other jurisdictions, other developed countries, and our sister nations in the Caribbean. That being said, I would also like to share the sentiment that where we can improve in this area now, that we do. So suggested amendments to the Domestic Violence Act, for example, I think that's something that we can approach and implement now. Certainly there will have to be various consultations surrounding that though. With that being said, I would like to say that the ministry remains committed to this cause in implementing its elderly care legislation, and we hope that we can do it as soon as possible for the senior citizens in Jamaica. Thank you
very much, Mr. Watson. I am looking at my online colleagues. I don't see any more hands there. And we are at the hour of 12:26. So I want to thank very much the Mona Aging and Wellness Group, Prof. Shera and her team, Ms. Latibader who came before, all of you who contributed to this presentation. Thank you, Mrs. Duncan Sutherland, as well, for giving us your perspective on the ground. All of this is going to culminate into a few documents that we are going to hunker down with in very short order. But I especially want to big up the Mona Aging and Wellness Group because they came not once but twice. And they are not necessarily the type of body that is required to carve out their schedule for us. So we really do thank you. Thank you for leading on this and the advocacy on this. Thanks to the Ministry of Labour for being here. I know you're going to be monitoring and preparing yourselves for the work that is going to flow. Well, I know you are doing it almost in tandem with this committee. So we look forward to what will come out of your efforts as well. And we hope we will all collide very positively and fruitfully in the end with something for our older population, our older folks, that will ease their burdens, address their concerns, and also help us as a society to shift our thinking to more positive tones and more positive recognition of the value of the contribution of our older people. I can't leave my meeting without thanking my parliamentary team. I want to big up the Legislative Council office and department. They have some heavy work, heavy lifting going on in the behind the scenes on our behalf, and I want to thank them for their efforts there. The research team and our, boy, I don't know if there's anybody more efficient than her, our efficient committee clerk, Mrs. Beckford. Thank you to my colleagues. We are adjourning on one note, and that is that we do have the freedom of the availability of the chamber on Friday, and so I am proposing that we meet at 10 o'clock on Friday in an online format, virtual format, to deal with some housekeeping and administrative matters for the committee. And thereafter, our next proposed meeting will be the 19th of June, that's a Thursday, and that's at 2 p.m. And we hope then to have the matrix which will collate the various submissions and the deliberations that we've had here to deliberate on, to begin the deliberative process on, and thereafter we'll see how much of that we get through at that meeting. So we're looking at the 19th and the 26th of June at 2 p.m. So if members could block that time, and we will confirm, well, certainly the 19th of June confirmed, we'll confirm the 26th in due course. Thank you so very much. Might I have a motion for the adjournment of this committee meeting? Moved by Senator Gale, seconded by?
Senator Fraser-Benz.
Senator Fraser-Benz, thank you so much. This meeting is adjourned.
must stop. It have to stop. Gang violence is not the solution to our problem. It will only cause pain and suffering. Let's find non-violent ways to solve